Hey, what's good? I'm not sure if you've noticed, but I'm a little bit of a Final Fantasy enjoyer. I mean, the first 15 videos on this channel are all Final Fantasy? Okay, well, they're Final Fantasy 14, which is relevant because I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. I actually haven't finished a single other Final Fantasy game. Now, the closest I got was 2/3 through Final Fantasy 9, but yeah. On a related subject, that one card game I played just got a Final Fantasy set earlier this year. So, seems like now would be a good a time as any to start one of the larger projects I've had planned for this channel. Introducing, reviewing all the mainline Final Fantasy games. When people think of games that define the RPG genre, you'll frequently hear things like Dragon Quest, Fallout, the Tales series, Xenoblade, and even newer examples like Disco Elysium and Baldur's Gate 3. But almost without fail, people will eventually mention Final Fantasy. The history of this franchise is immense, spanning Square's founding in the 80s all the way up to current day. That means it has an equally immense library of games of vastly varying genres. You've got the classic RPG mainlines, of course, but we also have tactics games, rhythm games, racing and fighting games, sim and party games, and even takes on Monster Hunter and PUBG. Hell, in 2005, we even got a mobile game called Final Fantasy VII Snowboarding, which was just Final Fantasy VII's snowboarding minigame on your flip phone. Neat. However, before all of the spin-offs, before the series had over 20 mainline entries, and before Masayoshi Soken danced in a chicken hat at a Square Enix-sponsored fan event, there was only... In 1983, the Denyu-sha Electric Power Company formed a new subsidiary. Created by the owner's son, Masafumi Miyamoto, this project was an attempt to enter the then burgeoning video game market. Its name, Square. At the time, it was pretty normal for games to be made by just one programmer. However, Miyamoto believed that the best way to remain competitive in an ever-evolving games market would be to diversify his new team's talent, bringing on not just programmers, but graphic designers and professional writers as well. As the group began recruiting new members, Miyamoto hired Hisashi Suzuki, Hiromichi Tanaka, and most important for this story, Hironobu Sakaguchi. During the next 2 years, Square would release a few semi-successful action games for PC systems. However, in 1985, the company managed to negotiate a licensing agreement with Nintendo, allowing them to start creating games for the Famicom. This was a fantastic opportunity since computers at the time varied vastly in their components and capabilities, which made it much easier to develop for a console with stable hardware. In 1986, Miyamoto re-established Square as an independent company, buying out the original gaming division from Denyu-sha. He also established the new offices in the very expensive Ginza district. By this point, Square had a couple games under their belt, like The Death Trap, and Texter, and King's Knight, and Rad Racer, and King's Knight Special, and all of their Famicom disc games didn't do very well. Wait, what? Yeah, so in late 86 and early 87, Square released a few games for Nintendo's Famicom Disk System, an add-on that was intended to give games better sound and a rewritable discs by using floppies. It did okay, but it was kind of expensive, the discs weren't very high quality, and there was this ridiculous licensing terms for developers, forcing them to hand over 50% copyright ownership to Nintendo, which led to middling reception from consumers, retailers, and developers. Surely Nintendo wouldn't make this sort of peripheral a habit, would they? Anyways, Square had published a few games for this thing, and they didn't sell well. This, coupled with the high rent from Miyamoto's 1,000 IQ plan to set up offices in Ginza, was leaving Square a bit strapped for cash. So, Miyamoto called in his 4 directors and told them, "Guys, it's not looking too hot. We gotta come up with something that'll bring in the big bucks." It was here that Hironobu Sakaguchi stepped in. "Hey, so why don't we make an RPG?" "What? No, you can't sell RPGs in Japan. What are you It turns out Enix's Dragon Quest had done sort of okay that year. Begrudgingly, Miyamoto agreed to let Sakaguchi start work on his RPG. Sakaguchi had wanted to make an RPG for a while, but kept having the idea turned away because... hadn't happened yet, and Japanese game companies saw RPGs as unpopular. His vision for the game was inspired by Ultima and Wizardry, which was cool except for one problem. It turns out Sakaguchi is a bit of a taskmaster and not very popular boss to work under. After a little bit of convincing, however, Sakaguchi was able to form what Square would refer to as its A-team. This included designers Koichi Ishii and Akitoshi Kawazu. Coder Nasir Gabelli, graphic designer Kazuko Shibuya, programmers Kiyoshi Yoshi and Ken Narita, debugger Hiroyuki Ito, and composer Nobuo Uematsu. Additionally, they brought on freelancer Kenji Terada as their scenario writer, basing the story on a concept by Sakaguchi. Early on in development, Koichi Ishii floated the idea of hiring the illustrator Yoshitaka Amano as a character designer. Sakaguchi had never heard of Amano and rejected the proposal out of hand. Almost immediately afterwards, though, Sakaguchi showed Ishii some magazine clippings of the art direction he wanted for the game, only for Ishii to inform him that the images had actually been drawn by Amano. Now all that was left was to come up with a name for the game. There's a very common urban legend behind the name Final Fantasy. It states that the final comes from Square being on the verge of bankruptcy and this RPG being the last game they expected ever to make. As we've established, this is sort of true. Sakaguchi's real reason for choosing Final Fantasy, however, was because he really wanted the game to abbreviate to FF. Since the game was going to be a fantasy RPG, they locked fantasy into the title somewhere right off the bat. Now it was just a matter of finding that other F. In interviews, Sakaguchi admits that his choice to settle on Final for the title was partially because of the rocky financial situation at Square, but also because he had personally decided that if the game did poorly, he would quit game design and return to college. That said, he's also admitted that any name with F in it would have been fine. They just happened to go with Final. And thus, Final Fantasy was born. Now hey, hopefully you've been enjoying the video so far. If you have, consider hitting that like button. And if you're interested in what else I might be up to, I got the subscribe button for that. Alright, enough of a break. Back to the video. So, it turns out the original Final Fantasy has been re-released a lot. And I'm not just talking about the original MSX2 and NES ports. There's also the WonderSwan Color port, Final Fantasy Origins on the PSX, Dawn of Souls on the GBA, and all of the mobile and handheld ports released throughout the years. Each subsequent version of the game added more fixes and quality of life changes, as well as upgrading the soundtrack to take advantage of each new platform's sound capabilities, and also altering the visuals? While the original 8-bit sprites are iconic, each new release of the game featured slightly updated and more detailed characters and terrain, eventually ending up looking like this for the Final Fantasy 20th Anniversary release on PSP. Now, in my opinion, the sprites do look pretty good in this version, but there's just something that feels wrong? They sort of remind me of some of the default assets you can use in RPG Maker. If only there was a version of the game with all the quality of life improvements, but that kept the classic feeling sprites. Aw, sweet. In 2021 and 22, Square Enix released the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster series. The goal of these remasters is to remake their first 6 Final Fantasy games in as faithful a way to each respective original release as possible, all while maintaining the fixes, improvements, and quality of life changes each has built up over the past couple of decades. For Final Fantasy, this means taking the best of the different versions' upgrades while emulating the gameplay systems of the original Famicom release. Additionally, the game features new sprites done in the style of Final Fantasy V, but still recognizably influenced by the original Famicom and NES designs. Now, this version of the game doesn't have the 5 optional bonus dungeons that were included in the 20th Anniversary release, as well as all of the super bosses associated with those dungeons, but I felt like it was probably the best way for a new player to experience the game that started it all. I guess all that's left to do now is to see if I was right? As we open the game, we're greeted by the series' iconic prelude and a gorgeous logo with art of the Warrior of Light done by Yoshitaka Amano. There he is. John Final Fantasy. There's also this awful font here. We can fix that in the settings though. Selecting New Game presents us with 4 characters. These 4 are our protagonists, and it's here that we're able to select their jobs and names. Final Fantasy offers 6 possible character options. Warrior, a powerful offensive frontliner boasting high attack and defense. Thief, a quick and cunning melee fighter with a high flee chance. Monk, a speedy and skillful martial artist capable of delivering lightning-fast combos and dodging attacks with ease. White Mage, a wise spellcaster able to use healing and support magic as well as light-based spells to smite the undead. Black Mage, a mighty wizard effortlessly weaving the forces of nature into devastating spells. And Red Mage, an elegant spellblade that combines martial prowess with white and black magic at the cost of not being the best at any of them. After a bit of thought, I ended up deciding on a party made up of Warrior, Monk, Red Mage, and White Mage. Now, losing out on the highest tier of black magic is kind of rough, but the sheer versatility of the Red Mage's toolkit, along with functionally being a mini warrior, just seemed too good to pass up. And the class has this cool looking hat, too. Introducing Bringus the Warrior, Grognit the Monk, Thawd the Red Mage, and Hotoyo the White Mage. These four are about to embark on an epic journey that will alter the fate of the world. The world lies shrouded in darkness. The winds die. The seas rage. The earth decays. But the people believe in a prophecy, patiently awaiting its fulfillment. When darkness veils the world, 4 warriors of light shall come. After a long journey, 4 young travelers did at last appear, and in the hand of each was clutched a crystal. Well, here we are. Welcome to Cornelia, the City of Dreams. We've arrived for an audience with the king, and lucky for Bringus and co, some guy named Lucan prophesied that we'd show up with our magic crystals. So I guess the king's happy to speak with us. His Majesty has an all-important, history-shaping quest for us. Okay, actually he wants us to save the princess. Yeah, sure, I guess we can do that. It sounds like some guy named Garland kidnapped Princess Sarah and took her to the Chaos Shrine to the north. In the past, he was a beloved knight of Cornelia, but recently he's fallen to darkness and stuff. He's also allegedly like the finest swordsman in the kingdom, so I guess this will be a tricky fight. At this point, the game cuts us loose to begin our journey. Here in the city, we're able to buy our starting equipment and spells. For those of you unfamiliar with the original Final Fantasy, acquiring spells for your casters works very differently than in later entries in the franchise. Instead of learning new spells as they level up, magic users buy spells from the black and white magic shops. Additionally, in a system very reminiscent to Dungeons & Dragons, they have 3 spell slots per spell level, with each level allowing a certain amount of casts dependent on the character's overall level. In fact, while Akitoshi Kawazu was designing the combat, he initially borrowed as much as he could get away with from 1st edition Dungeons & Dragons. Along with magic, Kawazu also incorporated elemental weaknesses and resistance, a feature that was almost non-existent in Japanese RPGs at the time. They also pretty much just dropped the entire 1st edition monster manual into the game and just called it a day. Preparing to set forth, I buy Fire and Thunder for Thawd, and Cure, Protect, and Dia for Hotoyo. Dia is a light spell for use against the undead, but at the time I didn't know if it would come in handy, so I just picked it up, just in case. I also buy some potions and the best gear and weapons I could afford for my party. Little did I know, I had fallen for one of the classic Final Fantasy I blunders. With preparations complete, it's time to go deal with Garland. As we make our way north, I decide to engage in one of the RPG genre's most time-honored traditions, level grinding. Little did I know, I had fallen for one of the newer Final Fantasy blunders. Sort of. Combat in Final Fantasy I is pretty much as close to classic Square Enix design as you can get without just being Dragon Quest. Enemies are displayed on the left and your party on the right. Each turn you select an action for each character to take, and then each combatant's actions play out in an order determined by their agility stat, plus some change. No, really, the way attack order is determined for each turn involves the game taking each character and enemy's agility and just adding a random number from 0 to 49. Just like in Dungeons & Dragons that so heavily inspired this game's gameplay, action economy is king. Specifically, how many attacks you can land in a single turn of combat. The accuracy stat, alongside determining whether an attack lands, dictates how many times a character hits in a single attack. This has the unintended side effect of making melee attacks much, much better than magic. Pretty much in any circumstance that isn't crowd control, you'd rather just be hitting someone. Because why hit once for 500 when you could hit for 100 8 times? This also makes the black magic utility spells Slow and Haste the most valuable spells outside of the Cure line. While Slow halves the amount of hits an enemy lands, Haste doubles your own, which can lead to some monstrous damage when you casually land 20 hits in a single attack. Oh, and the elemental damage I mentioned earlier is in the game, but aside from Dia obliterating zombies, it's not always very clear what is weak to what. After bullying the local goblin population for a bit, I finally make my way to the Chaos Shrine. Man, this place is a dump. Aside from some undead and a leather hat, there's not a whole lot going on in this shrine. We do get an opportunity to use this cool mini-map that got added for the Pixel Remaster though. It's super useful, because it lets you see the entire layout of a dungeon's floor before you even start moving, which helps avoid dead ends and excessive enemy encounters. It also lets you peek behind closed doors to look for treasure chests, which feels a little bit like cheating, but In the inner sanctum of this shrine, we finally meet Garland. Apparently his big scheme is to kidnap the princess in order to exchange her for control of the kingdom. You know, because any ruler would give up their entire kingdom and power for their kid. Luckily for His Majesty, we're here to put a stop to Garland's scheme. Oh, before I forget, this game was originally not designed with players fighting every monster they came across in mind. I think the devs had this idea that if a player ended up in an encounter that looked scary, we'd just run away, which is why the thief's whole gimmick is having a high flee percentage. So anyways, Bringus and the gang kick the shit out of Garland, and we return the princess to Castle Cornelia, and as thanks, she gives us this loot. Cool? Also, the king decides to tell us the full version of Lucan's prophecy now that he's gotten what he wants out of us. Yep. Yeah, it tracks. As it happens, the prophecy has nothing to do with him or his daughter and is actually about us restoring the light to the elemental crystals that maintain balance in the world. I guess the king offers to rebuild the bridge to the north as a sign of appreciation? Now our quest can truly begin. Yeah, okay, the title scroll is pretty cool. Alright, so you might have been wondering what the deal with this video's title is. I might have sort of played this game a little weirdly. Look, I didn't break anything or use glitches, nothing like that. It's just, the game has a very specific way it wants to tell its narrative. But even though it really wants things to progress in point A to point B order, it doesn't always make where you're supposed to go or what you're supposed to do, or even what point B is clear. The way they want to resolve this is by having the player talk to every single NPC in each town. Even then, since the game only has a couple restrictions on where you can go and when, it's not hard to accidentally do things out of order. So, for this video, I'll be going through my adventure and sometimes explaining what the game wanted me to do instead of what I did, you know, for comparison. Crossing the bridge, Bringus and the gang head east towards the city of Provoca. Turns out the citizens are dealing with a bit of a pirate problem. We confront Captain BK, who immediately sends 9 dudes after us before even thinking of talking to him. Unfortunately for these guys, we are built different. After thrashing the brigands, BK decides to become an upstanding member of society, and he also gives us a ship, which is pretty cool. This is where things start to go off script. Back in Castle Cornelia, I learned that the treasure room, which supposedly has some kick-ass weapons inside, was sealed using a mystic key which is currently in the possession of the Elf King. I don't really know where any of the elemental crystals we need are, but new weapons sound cool. I also don't know where anything else on the map is either, so I just pick a direction and start sailing. By luck, I end up in the Elven Kingdom of Elfheim. Here, Thod learns haste, securing my victory in every conflict I will ever run into for the rest of the game, and Hotayo learns some healing spells. I guess that's important. I also learned that the King of the Elves died a while ago, and his heir, the prince, has been cursed by the Dark Elf King with a sleeping spell. It's a shame nobody knows where the evil king is, especially since it sounds like the only other person who can make a potion to help the Elf Prince is a witch named Matoya. Not that Matoya, this Matoya. So I start sailing around again and eventually end up at Mount Dwergar, home of the dwarves. There's not a lot to see here except Smith, the blacksmith, who offers to make us a magic sword if we bring him some adamantine, and also Narek, who wants us to bring him nitro powder so he can blow open a channel and let boats pass into the open sea. Okay. So the gang heads back to Elfheim, and then wanders off into the mountains, moving around the coastline until we end up in the swamp. Grognit promptly slips into a hole, dragging the entire party into the marsh cave. And there's a ton of monsters that inflict poison in here. This sucks. Wait, whoa, hey, whoa, what the hell? When did Grognit die? So, at this point, I become aware of that crucial mistake I made at the beginning of my playthrough. It turns out, monks have higher attack when they aren't wielding weapons, and higher defense and evasion when unarmored. Oops. Well, good thing I found this phoenix down on the next floor. After wandering around for a bit, I get jumped by a group of Pisco demons. Pisco? Psycho? I don't know. These guys. They're pretty tough, but unfortunately weren't ready for the fury of Grognit's hasted fists. They were guarding a chest with a, crown inside? I don't really know what to do with this, but it seems cool. We then head north through the mountains, ending up in this random ruined castle. Within, we meet some king who immediately starts laughing maniacally when we talk to him. Turns out he's a guy named Astos, who's the king of the Dark Elves, and apparently we've completed his quest by bringing him his crown, but also we've fallen for his trap, and he can use the crown and a crystal eye to become the one true elven king. And then he attacks. Oh no! He does unfortunately commit a fatal miscalculation, as Grognet is so fast, he outspeeds death itself to punch this guy in the face. Ooh, look, a crystal eye. After resting at the inn back in Cornelia, it does have the cheapest rooms after all, I decide to explore the little peninsula to the north of Provoca. Here, I find the cavern home of the famed witch Matoya, which I guess she's been here the whole time? Turns out, the crystal eye belongs to her, and she needs it to make the potion to wake the elf prince. We then take the potion to the prince, who wakes up, thanks us, and gives us the mystic key. Bringus and crew then backtrack through the ruined castle and marsh cave for some sick loot. Then we hit the castle treasury for some gear that's worse than what we literally just looted. But at least we got the nitro powder. Narek then blows up the land bridge, and we're now free to explore the rest of the map. Okay, so clearly that wasn't how it was supposed to go down. So let's take a quick look at what the game wanted us to do. Either before or after getting the ship, we're supposed to head north to talk to Matoya and learn about her missing eye. Then sail west to Duergar to learn that Astos stole the eye and about the nitro powder in the treasury, which gives us the reason to need the mystic key. Then we need to head south to Elfheim to learn about the prince that was cursed. In the city itself, we're supposed to learn about the ruined castle, somewhere, and then go there to be tricked by Astos into getting the crown from the marsh cave, only to then be betrayed on our return. Yes, tracks? So the whole game is like this. And similarly, it's really easy to do things slightly out of order the entire way through. I'll be honest, I don't think in this specific situation that that's entirely a bad thing, considering the actual intended order of events results in 3 times as much backtracking. From here, we head west of Duergar to the town of Melmont. I think, like, one dude in Cornelia mentioned it existed. The city happens to be super close to our first crystal of light, the Earth Crystal, which means that it suffers the most from the crystal's inactivity, and they also have a really bad vampire problem. Here we meet a random dude named Une, and pick up some spell upgrades before heading off towards the Cavern of Earth. There's nothing that really provides any kind of actual threat here, aside from maybe the Earth Elementals, but they only take 2 rounds of combat instead of just the 1. Oh, and there's also cockatrices. They have a chance to inflict a really frustrating status called Stone, which turns you to stone.
Damn, who would have guessed?
This functionally counts as your character being dead and can only be cured with a spell we don't have yet, or by using a golden needle. Which, I did not buy any of those. So I guess we're gonna have to be really, really careful. Oh, god damn it. When we reach the bottom of the cave, we encounter the vampire, and he just starts yapping about death and destiny before being acutely reminded that he is weak to both Firaga and getting punched in the face 6 times. We find a star ruby in a chest nearby, and also learn that the passage to the Earth Crystal Sanctum is sealed under the stone slab. So, unfortunately, we are forced to participate in this game's idea of adventure, backtracking. After recovering in Melmond, we head further west until we reach the Giant's Cave, and then this guy eats our star ruby. We swipe an axe and helmet upgrade for Bringus and then press south towards the Sage's Cave. Inside, we find the Sage Sada, who presents us with his rod, and then tells us that the vampire is actually just some guy's goon instead of like an actual big bad guy. He's just a minion. So now we have to walk all the way back to the Giant's Cave, then back to the Cavern of Earth, fight our way through the dungeon for a second time before we return to the slab. I will not mince words. This is awful. But at least the whole party is now level 25. And they turn Bringus to stone. You know what? No. I don't care they turned my heavy hitter to stone. They need the handicap. It's like fighting with one arm behind your back. This is cope. Finally, we arrive at the Earth Crystal Sanctum and stand before the first of the 4 fiends, Lich. Now, you might be thinking this is looking pretty bad when the boss immediately hastes himself. Clearly, you have not been paying attention. Grognet is a force of fucking nature. Haste for 12 hits per turn, temper for a damage, and fuck it, invis because I can afford to waste spells. And you know what? I think I'll treat myself. Haste the red mage. Boom. That's how it's done. Now that we've healed the Earth Crystal, we're kind of left directionless, so I just sailed eastward until I saw this cool moon-shaped lake. Now you'll never guess, but the town in the middle is called Crescent Lake. We pick up some equipment upgrades, including one of the only shields wieldable by red mages, as well as some baller white magic. Then we make our way to the edge of town to visit the Circle of Sages. It's 12 sages arranged in a circle. I don't know what else you want from me. Here we meet Lucan, who tells us some cryptic message about cycles and wrath. Honestly, most of these guys just give cryptic messages about the game, you know, where it wants you to go, wants you to do. It just, you know, except this guy. This guy gives us a canoe. Yeah. See, the normal ship is too big to fit down rivers, so we gotta use this dinky thing instead, which is unfortunate, since rivers are stupid dangerous. At this point, the sages want us to head to Mount Gold to defeat the Fiend of Fire. However, I saw this cool-looking river system north of Crescent Lake when we first got the boat, and I kind of want to check that out instead. At the end of this river system, we find a cave nestled in some mountains. This is the Ice Cave. Look, it's a cave full of ice. I don't really know what you want from me. At the bottom of the cave, we run into the Evil Eye, which is presented at as a boss, but he dies in 2 hits. But we found this Levistone. Oh shit, that's that thing that the dwarves mentioned. Huh. So here's a fun fact. There are 2 elven sages in Elfheim that will both allude to a prophecy they know they're going to receive one day, but they haven't yet. And for some reason, if you return to the town with the Levistone, one of them will suddenly tell you to take it to the desert. How are you supposed to know they suddenly get new dialogue? I don't know, but I guess we're going to the desert. When we get there, an airship blasts out of the sand. And since no one else is here, I guess finders keepers. This thing gives us nearly unrestricted access to every location left on the map. And what better way to celebrate the newfound freedom than to just go to some brand new town we probably shouldn't go to yet. This is Onrak. It rests on the shore near where the water shrine used to be before it sank into the ocean several hundred years ago. We get a bunch of plot hooks here, like a dragon currently undergoing a rite of passage, a caravan that set up camp north of the village, the existence of the Rosetta Stone, which is in the sunken shrine, and according to some guy named Cop, I think that's his name, the fact that some machine fell from the sky into a waterfall north of town. Yeah, fuck it, let's go explore the waterfall. Oh, cool, there's a cave back here. And at the back of the cave, we find a whole-ass robot. It tells us it's been expecting us, hands us something called a warp cube, warns us about Tiamat and a flying fortress, then promptly self-destructs. I guess we're doing robots and flying fortresses now. There's also the first ribbon in one of these chests here. These things will become mainstays of the series, equipable by all characters and providing resistance to all elements of damage as well as some pretty decent defense. Hotio gets the first one because the last thing we need is our healer getting hit with some magical nuke and dying. Alright, now that we met a robot and got a futuristic what's-it, I kind of feel like checking out whatever that dragon was going on about. Around the center north of the map are the Cardian Isles, home to a benevolent community of dragons and their king Bahamut. He informs us that he honors those with courageous spirits and that he will reward us if we return with a mark of courage from the Citadel of Trials. So off we go to the east, I suppose. This bird-shaped continent is pretty much the final zone of the game, so you'll be happy to hear that nothing on it can even hope to prove a challenge. On the left wing of the bird sits the Citadel of Trials. The old guy in charge of the temple announces that since we have the crown from the Marsh Cave, we are worthy to challenge the Citadel. Which is kind of odd, since you need the crown to be able to blow up the land bridge and actually access the rest of the whatever. Alright, let's see what this temple is all about. What the hell is this? Welcome to Baby's first Shin Megami Tensei teleport maze. This dungeon is really boring. Just trial and error your way through the maze while having to fight hordes of not very difficult enemies. There's no indication which teleporter is the correct choice, so you're just guessing until you manage to get the correct route through the floor. The third floor is far less exciting. It's just this like spiral shape, but it has some neat equipment upgrades. Like this thing just called Gauntlet. It casts Thundara on the entire enemy side without consuming a spell slot when used as an item in battle. In fact, there are a lot of items that have similar effects that you'll see me using for the rest of the playthrough. Finally, we reach the final room of the Citadel of Trials and can collect the Proof of Courage. A rat tail. Yeah, sure, you know, if it's what the Dragon King wants, it's what he gets. One disappointing boss later, and we're on our way back to Bahamut. Appearing before the Dragon King, we present him with the proof of our triumph. In exchange, he bestows us with a surprisingly underutilized game mechanic throughout the rest of the franchise. A job promotion. I actually think we only see this really happen in like 2 other main series titles, though it's really common in the Tactics series. In Final Fantasy I, every job is an upgraded form, allowing access to specialized job equipment, higher tier spells, and just general better stats. Bringus becomes a knight, Grognit a master, Thawd a red wizard, and Hoteo becomes a white wizard. Shit! Fuck, quick, take the hood off! Now, before we go back to saving the world, there's a couple places I want to check out. I stop by the caravan and buy a bottled fairy, for some reason. And then find this village that entirely speaks in an ancient language I can't understand. Cool! And finally, this village in the mountains where the fairy we bought was kidnapped from. In exchange for freeing them, they give us some magic water from the bottom of their spring called Oxyale. According to the fairy, it produces an endless supply of oxygen underwater. Which, that's cool, but I bet the intended steps to do all of this were just awful. Now that we've sufficiently obliterated this game's sequence of events, I guess we'll drop Hoteo into Mount Golg. Oh, and we fixed the fire crystal too. From here we head back to Onrak, then down into the water shrine using this bootleg submarine and the Oxyale we got earlier. The shrine is the home to the mermaids, but unfortunately they've all been forced to hide in the highest floor due to the water fiend squatting in the basement. While we're up here, we might as well pick up the Rosetta Stone. We'll probably be able to use it eventually. Oh, and also this gauntlet that casts a massive self-buff spell when used as an item. Steamrolling our way through the schools of sea monsters, we eventually arrive at the Water Crystal Sanctum. Kraken is waiting for us here, but what he isn't waiting for are these fucking hands! Get obliterated, idiot!
Yeah, and we fixed the water crystal too. Yay.
Our next destination is Melmont. Again. We've got to take the Rosetta Stone to the weird dude, Une. He can use it to teach us Lufenian, that ancient language only spoken in that one village from earlier. Fortunately, our heroes are enlightened spirits, and simply learn the entire language after one conversation. Yeah, okay. Okay. Returning to Lufenia, we get a lore explosion from the citizens. Turns out they're the descendants of a technologically superior super civilization that used to live in that flying fortress the robot we earlier mentioned. In fact, their ancestors also built the robot, the warp system to reach the fortress, and the airship we've been cruising around in. Specifically, one of their scientists named Sid, who was a genius scientist and engineer. While Sid has become one of the most defining traits of Final Fantasy games, with a character sharing the same name appearing in almost every game in the franchise, Final Fantasy I Sid's actually a retroactive edition made in subsequent releases of the game and wasn't part of the original Famicom version. According to the people here, 400 years ago when Tiamat the Wind Fiend invaded their fortress, the Lufenians divined that the 4 fiends were actually servants to another greater threat. However, the 5 heroes they sent to search for this evil vanished, with rumors circulating that they were cursed, turned into bats. There are a lot of bats in like every cave in the entire game, and they can all be talked to. I really hope they don't send us to look for these heroes. We also find out that the Lufenians have a technique to pass down memories from one individual to another, which isn't relevant to this game's story, but I wanted to bring it up now so I can call back to it in a later video. Finally, as we get ready to leave, this last Lufenian presents us with the Chime, a crucial key item that one other NPC in a completely different town implies might be here. We need this thing to unseal the Mirage Tower, which allows us access to the Sky Fortress. But first, we need to cross the desert. Oh, fuck! The Mirage Tower has a lot of rogue robots in it. It also has the Aegis Shield, the best-in-slot shield for knights that resists both poison and stone. Reaching the top of the tower, we use the Warp Cube to activate the gateway and teleport into the Flying Fortress, which continues the game's trend of having nothing remotely threatening to worry about. Look, even these knights that know the spell Death just aren't fast enough for the beastly force that is Grognit. As we journey higher into the dungeon, we eventually run into this weird lump of metal. Oh, wait, this is that like adamantite stuff Smith mentioned. Cool. We also find a Protect Cloak, which is the highest level shield for non-knights and can be equipped by all spellcasters. Very cool. Approaching the zenith, we find a viewing platform that lets us gaze down at the planet below. The elemental energies from the 4 crystals are being drawn to a singular point, the Chaos Shrine. But before we can deal with that, we gotta take care of Tiamat. Bop. Yeah, okay, that takes care of that. And with that, we've restored the 4 crystals and brought balance to the elements. Except we haven't. Because according to the sages, we are now part of a 2,000-year cycle of wrath and destruction. Okay, what? So, they explain that the calamity brought by the Wind Fiend's arrival 400 years ago and the emergence of all the fiends since actually started due to an event that happened a few days ago. But that the person responsible has now fled 2,000 years into the past. Yeah, okay, I guess we're doing time travel now. On our way to the Chaos Shrine, I make a detour to drop the adamantite off with Smith. His neurons activate and he forges us the legendary sword Excalibur. Bitchin'. Alright, we're back in the Chaos. Oh god, the bats are talking! I guess we found the Lufenian heroes. They tell us that by using our 4 crystals on the Darkness Crystal, we can open a gateway into the past. The Chaos Shrine, past, fully commits to the tenets set forth by this game. Be really long, have high encounter rates, and don't pose any sort of threat whatsoever. Even when we run into another series staple, the final dungeon boss gauntlet, and have to refight all the 4 fiends, they barely put up any sort of challenge. This version of Final Fantasy has a level cap of 99, which is consistent with later entries. However, in the original Famicom release, the game was capped at level 50, and it really does feel like this release was balanced around that original level cap. Now, I had a similar difficulty issue back when I played Dragon Quest Monsters like a year or 2 ago, with the mid to end game being laughably easy. And I only bring that up because that was an entirely self-inflicted issue. My zealous pursuit of a more powerful monster functionally serving as a form of level grinding. Aside from the very beginning of the game, when I went out of my way to try and reach level 5 before fighting Garland, I did not grind at all this entire playthrough. Simply by running away as little as possible and fighting every monster that ends up before you, you'll be at a decently high level throughout the entire game. I'm personally of the opinion that RPGs shouldn't require the player to grind if avoidable, so I kind of feel like FF1's pacing is sort of decent. But that doesn't change that you can really easily eliminate all difficulty for yourself just by playing the game normally, which I do think is a bit disappointing. As we delve deeper into the shrine, we eventually find a stone slab blocking our progress. This is where we use the Chekhov's loot from the very beginning of the game, playing the prelude to unseal the way forward. We fight through the aforementioned boss gauntlet, and before we know it, we're on the penultimate floor. Here we find the strongest weapon in the game, the Masamune. You may recognize it from being this dude's signature weapon. Aside from having the highest damage and crit rate of any weapon in the game, it can be equipped to any character regardless of their job. Which does mean we could hand the thing to Hotoyo. As funny as a healer with a Nodachi would be, I do think the smartest play is to hand it to Thawed just to keep our 3 damage dealers dealing as much damage as possible. Finally, standing before the last door between our heroes and the final boss, I realize we're only 1 or 2 levels away for 50. Why not? For old time's sake. Stepping through, we encounter the one behind— Is that Garland? You rat bastard, I killed you! Alright, you're gonna have to stick with me here, cause we've got some time travel BS going on. 2,000 years from right now, in the present, we defeated Garland a few days ago. However, before he died, the 4 fiends used their elemental power to send him back in time using the Darkness Crystal. When he gets to the past, he uses his power of darkness to send the 4 fiends 1,600 years into the future to begin the calamity we put a stop to in the present. And so they could send him back in time when his present self was eventually defeated by the heroes. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Sure, whatever, go for it. He then reveals his true form, which has given him mastery over darkness and the power to create this endless cycle. Chaos. There's a slight catch though. He hadn't quite gotten to sending the 4 fiends into the future, you know, because we just beat them all up. So if we defeat him here and now, we can end his cycle before he even has a chance to start it. The final battle against Chaos feels dramatic. An amped up boss theme and a combat background that depicts the shrine falling into darkness sets the tone for an epic final confrontation. And Chaos is tough. Sporting over 20,000 health and hitting for hundreds of damage per hit, this guy is no joke. If you're not a peak alpha gamer, that is. Listen, Chaos has several flaws that prevent him from being an actual threat. First, unlike most scary RPG bosses, Chaos has 1 action per turn. This plays into the other 2 issues. Second, even hasted, he only hits 4 times per attack, limiting his damage output considerably. And third, even though his spells hit everyone on your team, his percentage chance to cast any other spell than Blizzara is less than 10% for each. This means he has a 50% chance of either using a normal attack or casting his weakest spell. And if he doesn't hit the whole party, that just gives Hotoyo a turn to full heal everybody. This guy was never going to stand a chance of beating us. Ever. And so, after a long and only sort of hard-fought battle, Excalibur deals the final blow. Chaos crumbles to dust, finally falling to the forces of light. In a final text scrawl, we learn that peace has finally returned to the world and the 2,000-year conflict has come to an end. The heroes prepare to cross back through time to the present, to a world with all the people they know, the king and queen, the princess, and even Garland, all alive and well. However, because of time travel BS, by defeating chaos in the past, the conflict never happened, erasing our journey and struggle from existence. And then the game unironically hits us with, the real crystals of light were inside all of us all along. And that was Final Fantasy. A monumental journey that spawned a legendary franchise. And now I can proudly say I've experienced it too. Was it the most difficult RPG I've played? No, not by a long shot. But it's an earnest attempt to tell a compelling narrative coupled with evergreen turn-based combat design, which combines for an unexpectedly fun experience. Now, with that said, I do think the story itself is very rudimentary, bordering on clumsy. Certain plot points are easy to miss or even wait until the 11th hour. Look, I'm looking at you, time loop plot. What are you doing here? Additionally, the way the game wants you to play it is frankly insulting. The amount of backtracking required from the player might have worked back in the 80s when a single game needed to last you as long as possible, but if a modern game tried to pull a stunt like this, it would be flat out unacceptable. At the end of the day though, this game did originally come out in the 80s. Even after giving it a new coat of paint and fixing the numerous bugs and errors from the base game, at its core it's still that do-or-die RPG from almost 40 years ago. For this Final Fantasy project, I've decided to actually offer up a numerical score for each game. We're going to be doing a scale of 1 to 10, and I mean a real 1 to 10 scale. None of that 7 means it's bad garbage film and game reviewers have been doing for the past decade. With that established, I'm giving Final Fantasy 1 a score of 6 out of 10, earning it a good, which is honestly a pretty strong start, all things considered. Now, before I bring this video to a close, I do need your help. Going forward, the differences in each Final Fantasy game release kind of get more and more impactful to the overall experience, especially when entirely new storylines and characters are added in certain versions. If you've played any of the original 6 Final Fantasy games, I'd like to hear your opinion on what the definitive version of each game is. For example, for Final Fantasy III, is the Pixel Remaster better for its authenticity, or is the 3D remake better for adding new characterization to the main cast? If you're willing to offer your thoughts, I'd really appreciate you sharing it in the comments. And with that said, we've finally reached the end of the video. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you sticking it out until the end. If you enjoyed this long look into the original Final Fantasy, consider leaving a like on the video. And if you want to stay up to date on whatever new projects I come up with, consider subscribing. We're actually getting really close to the first 1,000 subs on this channel, so if you'd like to help me reach that milestone, consider sharing this video around. I'd really appreciate it. And if you're interested in the art throughout this video, I posted all on the rest of the assets I make for my projects over on Blue Sky, so consider checking that out. And what was your first Final Fantasy experience? I'd love to hear about it in the comments, so share if you want. More than likely, the next video won't be on Final Fantasy II, so I can have a little bit of time to decompress after 1, but it will be on another super popular game franchise that just got a new entry within this past year. But you'll just have to wait and see what that is. That'll be it from me today. See you around. Peace.